G'day everybody, where's Wally here? Hey, Brian's Logic. Well, for some reason, Brian has given us all a 2 hours plus some presentation on just how GPS works. Well, it's how it works in Brian's mind, at least. And it will be a surprise to exactly nobody that once again these loony flatties are trying to steal globe technology and rebrand it as their own, pitching it with the usual, only works on a flat earth. Of course, I was totally intrigued. Ooh, sidebar. I love me some electronics and computers, as most of you guys already know. Now, I even built a GPS-based car speed alarm way back in 2006. And later, as shown here, I made a GPS car tracker with a 2G data link module, and a few years later I had to upgrade that to a 3G module when 2G was phased out in Australia. Anyway, I just wanted to say I have played a little bit with GPS modules, and do stick around as I, for fun and because I can,
Abort.
decided to point a Newtonian telescope at some GPS satellites to see if I can see them and track them, and it was particularly great.
Abort.
Well, back to Brian. Now, I won't go through all the derp that happened that day. It was just too much to burden your minds with. But that's where I come in. I listen to this tosh, so you don't have to. Oh, what the heck. Let's point and laugh at a few of them anyway. Okay, let's kick it off once again with Brian as the self-appointed subject matter expert.
The borders never look into things. They don't look into stuff. We look into stuff, and all they can come. Like, I can guarantee if they came back at me tonight, they'd only be picking on little tiny specifics, little, sticking pins in me. That's all they could come back, because you can't.
Oh, Brian, I'm not just going to go pick on this one. I'm going to point out every single little dumb mistake and misunderstanding you made, mate, and there's a lot of them.
If they put the receiver in the centre there, if I'm correct about this, they put the receiver in the centre there, all these different G26, G21, all this, they're all supposedly satellites that are in the vicinity of that receiver kind of thing, right?
In the vicinity? Well, kinda, as long as you count 20,000 kilometres up and away as just nearby.
It doesn't matter what's up there, right? Try and remember this when people are looking at this. Look at this one. This is the working out via triangulation.
Triangulation, Brian, based on what? This is the sky map of the sats in view, and this is 100% only showing valid angles after the GPS had a valid fix. If you knew anything about GPS, you would know that.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter. This thing about trilateration and triangulation, they're using both, right? They'll use everything they have to. They're not going to go, oh, we won't use trilateration, or we won't use this thing about trilateration and triangulation. They're using both.
No, Brian, that can only use multilateration. All that the receivers know is distances. It cannot use triangulation as it does not and cannot know angles to satellites. And I said angles as angles are both azimuth and elevation. You keep forgetting about the elevation angle, Brian.
I haven't really given that one a much thought. Here we are again with three circles, and now they're turning them into triangles.
Brian, why are you using only 3 triangles anyway? All the documentation about GPS says receiver requires 4 satellites to acquire a fix. Remember, we have 4 unknowns here, the X, the Y, the Z, and the time. So we need 4 satellites.
I haven't really given that one a much thought. This is what they're trying to make people believe. So they're trying to make people believe that these 2 signals and it's basically somehow they're going to have to come up with an arc length type situation to try and find the receiver is going to have to somehow mathematically work out arc lengths to try and find its position, blah, blah, blah.
Well, you may blah, 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 Brian, but yet again, you are showing that you do not know how GPS works. There is no arc length needed. It's about the distance between the satellite and the receiver.
The timing of the signal, right, because I suppose they have to work out timings of the signal, right, this is the claim, right, using general relativity nonsense.
I know you whistled past that a little earlier, didn't you, Brian?
Okay, this is when things start getting tricky for the official claim. So if they're on a globe, right, this is the thing. If they're on a globe, their angle...
Ah, I see where you got all tricked up, Brian. You want to play with angles. GPS does not need them, so let's skip all the fail that follows as Adam and Kiwi and Brian. It's a real circle of jerks here.
Did you ever hear of a V5?
What's that, a new car?
No, it's an old sock. Get out.
A line straight down from the satellite, they have that little angle there and they have this angle here.
Brian, you don't even have two angles.
So even if they work out this third angle here...
Oh, stop it with the language, Brian. No need to be so, schoolboy over your lack of angles.
The real way GPS works and why it works that way. Okay, first slide please, Kiwi.
So this is how Brian thinks GPS works. Bearing in mind, he's assuming angles that he just doesn't have, rejecting distances that he does have, so in essence, straw-manning this totally ridiculously.
It knows that at that degree, which is, let's say, 328 degrees northwest, right, that there is a signal subpoint in that direction from the receiver.
Wrong. The receiver only knows the distance to the satellite. It is not told the angle, and it has no idea which way north is, so what the hell good is an angle anyway?
Now, based off of that signal subpoint that it has, and the time that it received the signal, or the signal was sent, it knows if you just come to the celestial GP here in the blue, right, a blue serrated line and a blue dot, it knows that at that exact time, at that exact coordinates, that there was a navigational star, right, directly over this point.
Celestial? Navigational star? Brian, what the hell?
So now it has 2 points, right? And what it does with that is that runs that line at that compass degree, which is 282 west. It runs that directly to whatever it is, east, right? In the opposite.
How are navigational stars going to do anything for you? You need to be able to observe a star and the angle to the star to celestial navigate with it. Oh wow, Brian, you have just proved that you have no idea about GPS, and simultaneously, you've got no idea about celestial navigation either.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter. Now, it also then picks up something from an aircraft, information from an airplane. At that time, there was, let's just say, an American Airlines plane flying right off out to its northeast or whatever. Right, and a subpoint of that, it knows its coordinates from that, and it runs that line directly through as well. So now it has 3 crossing lines.
Brian, you're just digitally extracting stuff, and I don't mean with nuns and ones. A GPS receiver cannot receive any transmission from a plane. And even if, let's say, it did know where the plane was and the position was somewhere nearby, what good is that information? The receiver can't know the direction to the plane. The receiver doesn't know where it is yet, remember, Brian?
It doesn't matter what's up there. And it then also, what's that place? Galveston, right? It gets information from a boat in Galveston, right? Off the bay there, Galveston off of Texas. A ship subpoint there, and it runs that directly through.
Oh my God, Brian, a boat? How does the receiver know the angle to run that line at? You just made that up, and neither QE nor Adam was smart enough to call you out for doing it. Amazing.
But everything else, and I mean everything that's come out of your incoherent blowhole, has been a belly laugher.
So what it has is it has 4 actual coordinates and 4 pseudo coordinates, but it has that gives it like 4 crossing lines, right? And that's how it starts to figure out where it is.
All those angles are assuming the receiver knows where it is. This is horrendously wrong, Brian. You cannot do that.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter. Because all the mapping is already inside the receiver, right? That's green signal subpoint, that first subpoint, right? Once it figures out, right, where all those places are, and it figures out its own position, from the mapping it has internally, it knows its elevation.
Oh, just when I thought you'd spoken all the dumb words possible, Brian, you surprised us all and found more. Now, let me get this right. You magicked up a location. You generally think that all the receivers in the whole world have maps in them, and they do not. and you think it can get the receiver's elevation by looking up a reference table. One problem, Brian, old chap. Let's say Wolfie is flying his $1 million jet at 51,000 feet. According to your GPS operational guide, his onboard GPS will be finding the lat long and telling him he's still on the ground. Your scheme, I'm afraid to say, Brian, is unable to calculate altitude. And we all know that GPS does calculate altitude. Therefore, your scheme is very wrong.
But everything else, and I mean everything that's come out of your incoherent blowhole, has been a belly laugher.
Number one, they're always telling us GPS only works on a globe.
Yes, GPS can only work on a globe, and you need to have orbiting satellites. Orbits go around the Earth. The necessary antecedent of an orbit is that there is a globe to orbit around.
It doesn't matter what's up there. No, this is proof, everything I've shown here tonight, that GPS works on a flat plane and it uses a flat plane.
I think you showed us that GPS can't work on a flat plane as you do not have the angles you need to triangulate.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter. You must remember it's using Cartesian coordinates. 2 and 3 dimensional Cartesian.
I was just going to bring that up and snuff it right out.
Of course, it's using Cartesian coordinates. Well, duh. That is the most efficient way to work with straight line distances in a 3D space. Why do flatties think that Cartesian is a globe deal breaker? I have no idea.
Yeah, this is the problem. And that's what I said back in this is what I was saying back in whenever it was, 2018 or 19, whenever I was doing those presentations. Those coordinates do not work on a spherical surface. And to figure all this out, it needs to make all of that a coordinates plane, or a series of Cartesian systems. It has to. There's no way around it. That's how it works. So all the zeniths from all these locations must be parallel.
Brian, you're assuming that Cartesian means a local plane, and again, that is wrong. GPS uses ECEF Cartesian system, and it's encompassing the whole globe and the orbits of the satellites all in one great big ECS-based XYZ system.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter.
Well, did you feel it? The folds in your brain literally flattening as Brian spoke? Each one of us lost more IQ points by listening to that than those three have collectively. Oh, what a bad day to have ears. Where's my brain bleach? Well, we're just going to have to go and learn something to counteract all of that derp. Brian does some reading. Brian reads about Cartesian and polar coordinate systems. Brian misunderstands what's being said.
The Cartesian reference system is particularly useful as calculations are simpler to perform, no knowledge of spherical geometry being required. However, the relationship between positions on the Earth's surface are different to visualize in this system, and this is particularly important in navigation. For instance, the concept of height is also unclear. What they're talking about here is they want to normally try and use spherical coordinates from the center point of a globe, right, out to points on the surface of Earth. But when they're dealing with reality, then they must use a horizontal plane. So basically what they're admitting here, without indicting them for being liars, I'm just saying they're admitting here that the system of spherical coordinates from a center point to points on the surface of a globe doesn't work in reality when we're actually...
Okay, Brian, this is really simple. The ECEF system makes calculating the distance between any 2 points rather simple. As you just read, they never said that polar is not matching reality. Now, if you want to do a distance along the surface of the globe, then spherical trig is the tool for you, and something like the Vincenti formula is the beast that you will need. However, if you're looking for straight line distances, then with the coordinates in ECEF, and then you can use this little thing here. Much nicer. So, Brian, it's about simplification and the correct tool for the job, not what does and does not work. That's being a little bit disingenuous, is it not, Brian? Now, Brian goes way out into the weeds for the next hour or so of the show with all sorts of non-official diagrams and claiming silly stuff. He gets totally confused by data flow diagrams and how necessary technologies like assisted GPS and differential GPS and how corrections are determined and applied. Now, over the last few weeks, I tried quizzing Brian that I might be able to highlight his lack, but he knows well enough to stay away from my questions. I asked him to show how well he knows the XYZ Cartesian coordinate system by having a look at just 3 data points here. These are XYZ, ECF, and I asked Brian to firstly tell me where in the world these 3 points are, and then secondly, to tell me, are these 3 points in a straight line? I got, predictably crickets. And I will leave these 3 points as homework for the class. Pop your answers into the pinned comment, please. Now, what Brian did do was to deny seeing any of my posts I made about how GPS really works. Brian also ignored Choco Donuts, and that guy knows a hell of a lot about GPS. So how does Brian think GPS works? And you just know he'll be adding, it can only work on a flat earth. Now, these guys are just shameless when it comes to trying to steal concepts. Brian stated that, and that GPS receivers know the...
Basically, it gets 4 signals. This is what the claim is. It gets 4 or more signals, and those 4 signals will have angles to where the signal is coming from. It'll have a time that the signal was sent, right? It will have a compass azimuth direction to the sub point of where that satellite sits over on the Earth. Just think of it as GP point. So it's the same thing.
On those 4, the angle that's being sent. How the hell?
Compass? Where, Brian? Oh, you're seeing the bearing pointer, aren't you? Brian, I hate to break it to you, but that ain't a compass. That is to tell you which way the receiver is moving or needs to move to reach the desired location. Don't believe me? Well, did you read the manual for the Garmin 78SC? I did. Here, have a look.
I'm not going to go into that now. It doesn't matter.
Now, it does seem that there are actually a few models of GPS that were made in a very specialised way. One of these is the Furano SC70 satellite compass. It is actually a GPS designed to work as a compass without any magnetic sensors, and it just uses the GPS signals from space. So this particular GPS does have a compass, Brian. However, it requires a rather specialised antenna that's about 1/2 metre long. You might notice that on your smartphone, if there were one there, Brian. Other GPS units Brian cited as proof of GPS receivers having compasses is the Garmin 78SC. Now, Brian was attracted to this one as it has what appears to be a compass rose on the screen, and therefore this unit has a compass, and therefore he says,
a fighter jet receiving signals, ground signals, those signals are going to a ground station, but those signals from these satellites are also going to the GPS receiver on the plane. Now, the plane would very likely have a GPS receiver on the top and on the bottom, right? That's where, because it can receive signals then from below and above, right? So if there's high altitude balloon, whatever people want to believe, satellites or a plane that's higher than it, they can receive information from that.
GPS antennas are almost always only on the top of planes. I wonder why.
Well, everything I've shown here tonight, that GPS works on a flat plane and it uses a flat plane.
Now, Brian asked me many times to explain how a GPS works, but he claimed not to see it or for whatever reason, he did not want to look. Now, I would love to explain this, and bear with me, this is actually super easy, barely an inconvenience. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, is a constellation of satellites. We all know that. And it's used to approximate the location of the receiver on Earth. The GPS receiver uses 4 satellites that are in the review of the receiver to resolve the equations for the XYZ coordinates of the receiver and the value d, which is the difference in time between the receiver's clock and the satellite's clock. The difference in time is important because the location is approximated using the travel time of the signal from the satellite to the receiver, and this happens in very much less than a second. The equations that are solved to approximate the receiver's location using GPS are these, where x, y, and z are the Cartesian coordinates of the receiver, a, b, c are the Cartesian coordinates of the 4 satellites respectively, and d is the difference in the time between the receiver and each satellite's clock, is the travel time for the signal from the satellite to the receiver. Okay, so that all looks rather scary to me initially. 4 equations to solve to get x, y, z coordinates and the time of the receiver. But if you look carefully, you'll notice that all 4 equations for each satellite in view, and there's one for each satellite. That's the minimum required to get a good 3D fix. So we can just look at one and try to understand what's going on, and the others are just simply rinse and repeat. So the first 3 terms is just a little bit of Pythagoras in 3D. Difference in each of the 3 dimensions squared, added, and square rooted. How simple is that? The second part is the known distance away from the satellite, and that is simply multiplying the speed of light by the time taken. When the 2 distances are very close to being the same, then the receiver is said to have a fix. But wait, Wally, I hear Brian say, the receiver don't know X, Y or Z or nothing to nowhere. And I say to Brian, correct. So how does the receiver find the X, Y and Z positions of where it's at? It's super easy. It guesses. Yep, you heard me, it just guesses. Okay, let me give you a demo. Now I like to play a little game called Where Taken. It gives you a touristy photo and you have to say which country it was taken in. So my strategy is to guess. Now, I might have a clue or I might not. And as Brian says a lot, it doesn't matter. So today I started with Australia and, well, 13,595 kilometres away. Well, that's almost half a world away. So I guess again, somewhere on the other side of the globe. And, well, Italy sounds nice. And it's 880 kilometres away. Ah, much better, Wally. Third guess will nail it for sure. Let's try France. And it looks like I blew it. That's over 1,000 kilometres worse. Bad, Wally. Now, as going from Italy to France made my guess worse, well, let's go the other way and try Croatia. Oh, we're on par with Italy. Okay, Albania. Oh, now we're getting close. Let's try Greece, and bingo. So, just guess, and based on how good or bad that guess was, make another guess. And so that's the process just like the GPS receiver uses. A GPS receiver has a microcontroller or a mini computer which is running at megahertz or gigahertz clock frequencies, and thousands of guesses per second are super easy. And the paper I'm quoting from says that they're typically able to get to 7 decimal places with just 20 guesses on average. Now that is how a GPS receiver gets a fix, Brian. Notice that there's no need for any angles at all. It's pure multilateration.
That compass is pointing to the direction of the sub-point of the satellite or signal, right? Because it doesn't matter where the signal is coming from, it's the direction of it. It's treating it as a flat plane and giving it a direction. So next one, please, QE. Okay, here you have the very thing that would be on the screen there, that is a compass, right? This is a compass rose or whatever, or a compass card in azimuth, right? Because that's how they work, right? Next one, please, QE.
Now, Brian had himself totally confused here. He insisted that the receiver knows where the satellite or the subpoint of the satellite is located. To make himself feel like he knows what he's talking about, he even shows a sky map or the Sats in View display. One big problem for Brian is that the GPS only populates that sky map with azimuths and elevations after it has a valid fix. So the azimuths are not there. So azimuth is not the answer, Brian. In fact, I can show you, Brian, that a very basic GPS unit powers up from a cold start. It knows nothing, just like you. And within 30 seconds, it went from thinking it was 1980 to knowing the correct time and date. Then, a little while later, there are SAT IDs showing up in the Sats in View NEMA sentences. But very bad for Brian is that the azimuth elevation values are blank at this stage. A few moments later, and voila, the GPS has a fix and my lat long is showing up correctly, and importantly, the Sats in View screen is now showing the SAT IDs and their azimuth and elevation values. And for a bit of fun, and because I can, I decided to point my telescope at the GPS satellite and track it. Now, Sat Tracker is a great little program for doing this, and look at that. You can see the satellite I decided to track is PRN or ID 25, and the tracker is showing that it has an azimuth of 259 degrees and elevation of 67 degrees. And because the satellite knows both the location of the satellite and the location of the telescope, it is able to calculate those two angles. Now you need to know both to be able to calculate the azimuth from one to the other. You didn't think this through, did you, Brian?
I haven't really given that one much thought.
Then bottom right, you can see the actual azimuth and elevation angle that the telescope is pointing to, and it matches the tracking software precisely. And of course it should, because it is that tracking software that is controlling the scope at this moment. And for fun, I have a GPS outside as well, and I'm streaming the output from that little GPS, and look what we see for Sat 25. The same 259 and 67. But notice that they're only whole number degrees, by the way, Brian, so good luck triangulating with that. And finally, here's a look at the GPS and the telescope and the computer running them. And finally, Brian, I want to challenge you again. I know that you will ignore me. However, if you want to debunk me, here's how you do it, Brian. Please show any official reference that validates your claim that a GPS receiver receives azimuth angles from a satellite, or that a GPS receiver receives the elevation angle of a satellite. Now, we know that the satellite cannot be calculating the angle because it doesn't know where any of the receivers are located, and it would be needing to do that for the millions of receivers out there. We know the receiver can't calculate the angle because to do so, it needs to have a known position. And even though it might know where the satellite is, it doesn't know where it is. So how can it possibly calculate the angle to the satellite or the satellite subpoint? Seems you have a little bit of a circular reference paradox of rubbish going on here, Brian. Sorry, that turned out to be a rather long one. I'm glad you were able to bear with me if you're at this point. And if you made it to here, how about you give me a click, like, and a subscribe if you've never done so before. Thanks, guys. This was fun. And Brian's not going to enjoy this one little bit. Bye.
The ballers never look into things. They don't look into stuff. We look into stuff, and all they can come. Like, I can guarantee if they came back at me tonight, they'd only be picking on little tiny specifics, little, sticking pins in me. That's all they could come back, because you can't.
Oh, Brian, I'm not just going to go pick on this one. I'm going to point out every single little dumb mistake and misunderstanding you made, mate, and there's a lot of them.
Listen, it was an outstanding presentation, Brian. Listen, they don't have to get all the details out there.
Oh, I guess you can see the point here where QE doesn't get it himself.
They don't need all the details. I know how I'm going to kill it. And number one starts off with the second law. I'm going to destroy the satellites. I'm going to just get rid of them, poof, into outer space, no pun intended, and then go directly for the kill shot, right to the Cartesian coordinate system. Just take it right there and just...
And QE, if you try to say Cartesian coordinates, I will just say negative Z coordinate in Sydney. I'd like to see you try and explain that one.
Rock'em sock'em robots.
Abort.
Blow to the head. Blow to just flurry of blows. It's going to be a flurry of them. Yeah, outstanding presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to keep this one. We're going to do this one again.
Abort.
GPS only works on a globe.
Yes, GPS can only work on a globe, and you need to have orbiting satellites. Orbits go around the Earth. The necessary antecedent of an orbit is that there is a globe to orbit around.